Welcome back, guys, to the Chip Shot Football Podcast here on October 31st. Happy Halloween. I forgot to mention that. The last day in October. You know what's weird today over where I live? Just side note. It was like 80 degrees here. And that's not normal here where I live in New Jersey. So, last day of October heading into November. Crazy weather that we're having. So, it was just odd to me that happened today. So, I had to bring it up before we get to talking about the Steelers here a little bit. The Steelers are in an interesting situation, right? Because this year, the 2024 Steelers, right, they're on their bye week this week, so they don't really have to focus on anything other than trade talks, right? Because they're sitting in first place in the AFC North. They're in a spot where they're 6-2, when a lot of people picked them at best to be in third place or even last place in this division. Again, just surprising a lot of people like they usually do. Mike Tomlin, like he usually does, surprising a lot of people, and they find themselves in first place here halfway through the year, now in their bye week. And the quarterback question, the speculation and everything like that couldn't have worked out any better. Honestly, you look at Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. You got to see a little bit of both of them, right? Justin starting out the year because Russ was hurt. And you got to see where Justin was at, right? This was always going to be a longer-term project just based on what he was coming off of with the Bears. You got to see a little bit of him, be impressed by his athleticism and things like that. But clearly he still has some mechanical, quarterback-oriented, specific things to work out for. So you got the opportunity to move on to Russell Wilson over the last couple weeks, and it couldn't have worked out better. And you look at them on the sideline, they look like best friends and everything like that. That's the ideal scenario, right? You see a little bit of both, and there's no animosity. So that also has worked out better for them. And with Russ, this Steelers team is averaging at least 30 points per game over 2 games. I do acknowledge that, but it's something very rare, because the Steelers, with the recent quarterbacks that they had, last year with Kenny, Mitch, and Mason, it hasn't been like that at all. They've been averaging like 17, 18 points per game, putting a lot more pressure on their defense, but now they're getting a bit more support from this offense that, you look at a team averaging 30 points per game, you're thinking that they have this high-powered offense, but the first half of the year, you would admit that was the easier part for the Steelers' schedule. The second half of the season is going to be ugly, is going to be battering, bruising. It's going to be a fight in all these games because they have all their divisional games plus games against the Eagles, the Chiefs, and the Washington Commanders. It's going to get a lot tougher for this Steelers team, and it's great that they're playing very well right now, but the real test comes after this bye week. So everything's been good. The Steelers need to be better, though, because they're going to be tested a lot more. And the wide receiver position is clearly the spot they need to improve because, they were in for trying to trade for Brandon Ayuk. They almost got that done, but Ayuk ended up extending. They were rumored in some trades recently with DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, of course, even Deebo Samuel a little bit. So it's clearly been a position that they've identified as being weaker, you could say, even though, like I said, the offense is looking great with Russ. The second half of the year is filled with teams like the Ravens, the Bengals, the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Commanders, even so, high-powered offenses, right? Teams that ideally, usually also score 30 points per game, so you have to be able to keep up with them. Maybe not necessarily the toughest defenses, because the Bengals defense really isn't ranked that high. The Ravens defense is pretty good against the run, but again, their passing defense isn't great. The Commanders defense has been playing better. The Chiefs defense is really good. Eagles defense is getting better, but their offenses are really what identifies each and every one of them. So the Steelers need to be able to match up well with them because I think they're pretty confident in their defense. They're not really worried about that. They just can't find themselves in a spot where they're being outscored, right? If they could avoid it and trade for another wide receiver, they should go out and do it. And now during their bye week, they have all the time in the world to work those phones, talk to whoever they need to talk about, and try to get a receiver on this roster because Van Jefferson, hasn't really been too involved. Calvin Austin is looking nice. George Pickens is looking a lot better with Russ, but it's not enough. You need a little bit more. So, according to NFL insider Tony Pauline, the Steelers have 3 names that they've identified that they could be going after in the last couple of days here before the trade deadline. And some of those names here I have up for you guys here. Just 1 second. Here they are. Tony Pauline said recently that now sources have attached the names of 3 receivers they will look to trade for. They include Darius Slayton of the New York Giants, Mike Williams of the New York Jets, and Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. I am told the Steelers have a lot of interest in the Broncos wideout, but it is a matter of meeting Denver's asking price, which I'm told is high. So that's what Tony Pauline had to say on the matter. And looking at each one of those guys, right? We've talked about Mike Williams and how he would be an upgrade for this Steelers team, right? He would just definitely help out. A big body receiver, can be involved in blocking and whatnot, and it gives Russell Wilson the target, the catch radius that you would with a bigger receiver, right? George Pickens is one thing. If you can have another one of those guys, it would certainly help. So that makes sense. Mike Williams, actually Mike Williams, the situation on him depends a lot on tonight because with him and the Jets playing tonight against a Texans team, you look at that situation with the Jets being 2-6 and how I pretty much said that their season is going to be done with if they go with 2-7. That would incentivize them probably to look for buyers for Mike Williams. If they're able to lose, they'll probably be in a spot where they also see their season not really coming to anything that they would have imagined. So it becomes more likely then that they're willing to sell. Rather than if they win, they might think, all right, we can turn this thing around. Let's keep everybody and see where we are. So tonight's game has a big emphasis on that and see where they are after that. We have also other reports coming from ESPN's Jeremy Fowler saying that the Steelers continue their interest on Mike Williams. Like I said, Mike Garafolo is another one that reported before that the Giants, in terms of Darius Slayton, would have to be blown away by a trade to move Slayton at this point in time. But also, again, that's one thing. But if the Giants were to lose, like we picked them to lose against the Commanders, they'll also be 2-7. So what good does keeping Darius Slayton do if, already it hasn't really worked out? Why wouldn't you try to get something back from him on the last year of his deal as well? Could be something that would become more incentivized if the Giants lose. So that's another thing. Elsewhere, on Courtland Sutton, you obviously have the familiarity there with Russell Wilson. Last year, while Russ was on the Broncos with Courtland Sutton, he threw Courtland Sutton 10 touchdowns last year. So that's exactly what the Steelers need, right? Converting in the red zone, having 2 guys like George, like Courtland, even Darnell Washington, Pat Freiermuth, all those guys in the red zone. You can only imagine what they could do with that. The catch radiuses for all those guys would be insane for someone as accurate as Russell Wilson, someone that can't necessarily run and get into the end zone himself. You need to increase that possibility of finding him weapons that could get open, and even when they're not open, you throw it to a specific spot that only they could get. It's going to be extremely challenging to stop that team. So I'm leaning towards Courtland Sutton. I would love Courtland Sutton to be on the Steelers. Having him and George is a thing of dreams as a Steelers fan. So it's also tricky, though, because the Broncos we just mentioned as having a pretty decent season. They're 5-3, and they're in the playoffs right now, if I'm not mistaken. They have a playoff spot as things stand right now. So it would be pretty confusing and really not understandable why they would trade away their top target if they're 5-3 and really have a good shot of winning this year. It's hard to believe they would trade away Courtland Sutton. Therefore, Tony Pauline saying that the asking price is pretty high. But if the Ravens were to do the Steelers a favor, hand the Broncos a loss here, maybe it eases up that grip from the Broncos on Courtland Sutton. I'm really being optimistic about it because I would love, again, Courtland Sutton on the Steelers, but I think that one of the cheaper options like Mike Will or Darius Slayton are intriguing because Pittsburgh doesn't really have to commit to them long term. Both of them are on an expiring deal or just a 1 year deal with Mike Will and the Jets. So it's tough. Those are the three names. I assume one of them is going to be with the Steelers. Just not knowing, but based on who their general manager is, the Steelers, Omar Khan, he's been pretty aggressive on improving this team and going out and getting players that they need. So I assume it's going to be one of these three guys. Courtland Sutton is the ideal scenario for the Chip Shot Football podcast, but realistically, it might end up being something like Darius Slayton because I feel like the Giants are going to lose, and that could be something that could be worked out in the end. You know, probably this deal wouldn't get done until Monday or Tuesday because the Steelers love to do everything last minute. So that's where my headspace is at. Very interesting report coming from Tony Pauline suggesting from his sources that the Steelers would also ideally like to have Courtland Sutton, but it is a tricky situation, right? A lot is going to be clearer after this week based on wins and losses, so we're going to stick to that and keep track of that as we go on through the weekend and into next week. But for right now, we're going to go to another quick break, and when we return, we're going to stick to talking about trades and look at a wider spectrum of 4 other teams along with the Pittsburgh Steelers that also need to make trades before the deadline to really go all in and give themselves the best chance of winning in 2024. That'll be coming up right after the break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.